Imagine being put on trial for a crime you didn't even know you were accused of. That's exactly what was happening to all of humanity. In the heart of the stellar assembly, a holographic number hung in the air like a death sentence: 512,834. If you think this is unfair, hit that subscribe button, because you won't believe how this ends. Admiral Harcott's voice, rough as asteroid gravel, shattered the silence. "Dreadnought-class vessels," he growled. "Every last one capable of cracking a planet in half." The only other sound was the low hum from 218 pods, each holding a silent alien judge. Inside those pods, delegates from 43 star-faring civilizations were frozen in shock. Harcott stood at the podium, a formidable figure, a species of bipedal badgers covered in natural bone armor, bred for war for over 60,000 years. "These readings," he announced, tapping a control, "are from our brand new gravimetric scanner. We built it to find mineral deposits, to look for space rocks." He manipulated the display, and a star chart suddenly swarmed with terrifying red icons. He let the horror sink in. "Instead," he continued, "it peered through what we all thought were empty nebulae in human territory." The display zoomed in on a gorgeous swirl of purple and gold gas, the Carina Veil, a place everyone saw as the natural border of human space. And what we found was this. The image sharpened, revealing row after staggering row of warships, ghost-like shadows hiding in the cosmic dust. "That's 19 light-years of warships." Harcott's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "And this is just one location. We found similar fleets hiding in the Serpent's Arm, the Perseus Arm, and the Sagittarius Corridor." A delegate from the Ulithian Dominion, her elegant fronds trembling, finally spoke up. "Admiral, the combined fleets of this entire assembly number around 48,000 ships. Are you claiming the humans have 10 times our strength?" Harcott's gaze swept the room. "At a minimum," he confirmed. "The scanner can only see so far. There could be more." The silence that followed was heavier than a dying star. "For 3 centuries, Harcott said, his voice ringing with accusation, "we tolerated humanity. We saw them as noisy, chaotic children, amusing but weak." He slammed both clawed hands on the podium. "We were wrong." From another pod, a slow, ancient voice rumbled like shifting continents. "Admiral?" It was Prefect Zill, his craggy old head emerging from his shell. "What you're showing us is deeply concerning, but it only proves these ships exist. It does not prove their intent." "With all due respect, Prefect," Harcott snapped, "a species doesn't build 500,000 dreadnoughts just to admire them. This is for one thing and one thing only: conquest. This is centuries of secret planning." "That's a huge assumption," Zill countered. "It's the reality of war," Harcott shot back, pointing at the display, which now showed terrifying webs of potential attack routes. "If they moved tomorrow, they could be at the Ulithian homeworld in 19 days. We wouldn't even have time to fight back." He let the horrifying numbers glow in the dark chamber. "I formally move for a preemptive strike," he declared. "We have to hit them now, while they're scattered and think they're still hidden." Suddenly, another voice cut in, sharp and clear. A 3-scene delegate rose, her segmented body shifting. "A preemptive strike? Against a civilization that has only ever been peaceful? The diplomatic fallout would be catastrophic." Harcott didn't even flinch. "A small price to pay to avoid being wiped out." The chamber immediately erupted into chaos. Shouts echoed from every direction. But Prefect Zill, with the patience of a creature who had seen 400 years pass, watched calmly. He knew Harcott was using fear to start a war, and it was working. He needed to buy some time, but he knew a delay was just a temporary fix. Just then, his young assistant, Trimar, appeared at his pod, looking absolutely terrified. "Prefect, you told me to monitor human diplomatic channels." "And?" Zill asked. "The human attaché, she's here, in this building." Zill's ancient eyes widened just a tiny bit. "Get her, now. Use the emergency protocol." "But Prefect," Trimmer stammered, "the Admiral's orders forbid any human personnel from—" Zill cut him off, his voice low but filled with unshakable authority. Trimmer, we are 15 votes away from starting a war with a species that might have 10 times our firepower, and we have no idea why. Get Attaché Relly, now. Inez Relly was hiding out in the mediation garden, the one place her headset's encryption couldn't be cracked. She just needed a few minutes of peace. Sitting on a bench, watching bioengineered koi swim, she let the weight of her job just fall away. For a moment, she wasn't an attaché, or the daughter of two different worlds, or the galaxy's designated human explainer. She was just Inez, and she was tired down to her bones. Her headset chirped, but she ignored it. Just 5 more minutes, she whispered. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by a screaming emergency alert. Trimmer's panicked face appeared in a hologram. Attaché Relly, emergency summons. The assembly is in session. Admiral Harkott is presenting evidence. You have to come. They're voting. He trailed off, his entire body trembling. She was already on her feet, sprinting. What vote, Trimmer? Breathe. War, he squeaked. They're voting for war, against humanity. They found the ships, Attaché, all of them. Her mind was racing. 500,000 dreadnoughts? How? That was impossible. They were supposed to be... She didn't have time to finish the thought. She just ran. The massive chamber doors hissed open, slicing through the arguments and plunging the room into total silence. Every delegate turned to watch as Inez Relly walked in. By galactic standards, she was small, but she moved with a confidence that made her seem huge. She wore a simple gray uniform, her face a mix of her human and Volani heritage, giving her cheekbones a faint, armored texture. Admiral Harkott watched her approach the central platform, his expression unreadable. Attaché Relly, his voice boomed. Thank you for joining us. I trust you've been briefed? She stepped onto the platform, catching her breath, her eyes taking in the hundreds of hostile faces and the giant, glowing number that accused her entire species. No, Admiral, she said, her voice steady. I've been running. Perhaps you could tell me what this is all about. 512,834. That was the number. That was the accusation. Inez stared at the tactical display, at the angry red icons swarming through nebulas that were supposed to be empty. Her first instinct was denial. It had to be a glitch, a sensor misreading a field of asteroids. But she knew the Volani. They didn't make mistakes like this. As she zoomed in, she saw the fleets weren't massed for an invasion. They were scattered, spread out in a pattern that looked less like a battle plan and more like, well, it looked exactly like the glorious, chaotic mess her dad used to make when he'd decide a cargo bay was the perfect place for his potato sculptures. Oh, you have got to be kidding me, she whispered to herself. This was a classic human project, just scaled up to a ridiculous galaxy-threatening size. Taking a deep breath, she switched on her diplomat voice, the calm, steady tone that masked the frantic beat of her heart. Admiral Harkott honored delegates, she said. I understand your alarm. Looking at this data, I'd be worried too, but I assure you, you are fundamentally misunderstanding what you're seeing. Harkott's voice was like grinding stone. A misunderstanding? Are you saying there aren't 500,000 warships hiding in your territory? Oh, they're there, Inez confirmed cheerfully. They just aren't warships. A confused murmur rippled through the 218 pods. They're canvases, she explained. See, humanity solved scarcity a while back. Food, energy, housing, it's all handled by automation. Nobody has to work, which left us with a pretty big question. What do we do all day? She gestured at the giant screen. This is what we do. We form clubs, we start projects, we get creative. These aren't military fleets, they're community art projects. The Githian delegate twisted a vine-like frond, the equivalent of a deeply sarcastic eye roll. Your people build dreadnoughts as a hobby? All that free time, huh? Admiral Harkott said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Are you actually suggesting that your entire species built 500,000 warships because you were bored? I'm suggesting, the diplomat replied, trying to keep her voice steady, that when you give a people unlimited time and resources, they get creative. Building massive ships is just one of our creative outlets. The vessels you found? They're basically giant art projects. She knew how insane it sounded. The alien delegates just stared, a mixture of pure shock and disgust on their faces. Even Prefect Zill, the one person she thought might listen, was slowly pulling his head back into his shell. "A classic human deflection," Harkot sneered, cutting her off. "Do you really expect this assembly to believe that your people poured the resources of entire star systems into artistic expression, that you'd build weapons capable of cracking planets open as a hobby?" "I expect you to realize you're judging us by your own standards," she shot back, but she could feel the mood in the room turning colder. "Human motivations can be a little complicated." "Human motivation is irrelevant," Harkot snapped, taking a step closer. "Your capability is what matters, and your species, for whatever crazy reason, now has the power to wipe every single one of us out of existence. And you want us to just take your word for it? I want you to investigate before you start a war, to actually verify what I'm telling you." "Oh, we have verified," Harkot countered, pointing a sharp claw at the giant screen behind her. 512,834 times, every single one of them a planet killer, hiding in what you swore to us was empty space. He turned to address the entire assembly. "I call for an immediate vote on a preemptive strike." "Point of order," a deep voice echoed through the chamber. It was Prefect Zill. His ancient turtle-like head was fully extended, and his old eyes were locked on Harkot. He was a creature who had played this political game for 4 centuries. Assembly Protocol 9.4.2 regarding the introduction of new military evidence. Zill's voice was suddenly like steel. "The accused party has the right to a period of diplomatic clarification before any vote on military action can be held." A muscle in Harkot's jaw tightened. "Prefect Zill, this situation is far too urgent. The situation," Zill interrupted smoothly, "demands that we follow our own laws, Admiral. Surely you aren't suggesting we throw out the very rules that have maintained peace for the last 3,000 years? Zill stared him down. "Protocol 9.4.2 grants them a 24-hour window to provide evidence of their innocence before we can even begin to talk about a declaration of war." A low murmur spread through the room. Delegates began whispering to their aides. "This is just a delay tactic," Harkot growled. "This is procedure," Zill replied, his voice calm as a frozen lake. "If humanity is as dangerous as you claim, then 24 hours will only strengthen your case. But if you're wrong, wouldn't you want to know that before you start a war with an enemy that outnumbers our combined fleets 10 to 1? The logic was solid. Even the most aggressive delegates shifted uncomfortably at those odds. 24 hours, Harkot spat, the words cracking like ice. "I'll use that time to get our fleets into attack position. If a single human ship makes a move, it's an act of war." He shot a final, hateful glare at Enns. "Use your time wisely." With that, he spun around and stormed out of the chamber. Prefect Zill slowly shuffled over to Enns. "My child," he said, his voice low, "I've bought you a day. I truly hope you know what to do with it." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "How did they do it? Where in the galaxy did all those ships come from?" Enns could only stare at the impossible number hanging in the air. 500,000 dreadnoughts. 500,000 giant monuments to human creativity, boredom, and sheer, unbelievable recklessness. "Prefect," she said, "I have a theory." She rubbed her temples, feeling a massive headache coming on. "It's a completely insane theory that I really, really hope is wrong. But I have to find out for sure." Back in her office, a tiny gray box with a stunning view of the assembly's garbage incinerator, Enns stared at her comms console. She'd put in for a transfer 6 times, and each time, some bureaucratic drone had told her to find fulfillment in her current duties. Now, that same bureaucracy was mocking her with the message on her screen. It was an automated reply. "Thank you for contacting the Human Confederacy Diplomatic Office. All senior staff are currently on their mandatory creative sabbatical as per Government Directive 443-B to prevent administrative burnout. Please leave a message and someone will respond in 30 to 45 business days." 30 to 45 business days? Enns whispered to the empty room. The entire galaxy could be a smoking crater in 30 to 45 hours. She picked up her new headset, specially reinforced after she'd shattered the last three, and slammed it down on the desk, adding a fresh crack to the cheap plastic surface. It didn't help. She tried the emergency hotlines. All of them were busy. She tried the military liaison office. They were out on training exercises. She tried external affairs, the cultural exchange program, interstellar commerce, and finally, getting desperate, the Human Tourism Board. Their friendly, automated system offered to connect her to an agent who specialized in tours of haunted nebulas. Enz dropped her head into her hands and let out a short, bitter laugh. When she looked up, her gaze landed on a photo on her desk. It was her dad, Enzo Raleigh, grinning from ear to ear, covered in dirt, and proudly holding a potato he had painstakingly grown to look exactly like a Volani interceptor fighter. That potato took him 3 years. 3 years for a vegetable. "You'd know what was happening, wouldn't you, Dad?" she muttered to the photo. "You'd probably be out there on one of those ships having the time of your life." And then it hit her like a bolt of lightning. The official channels were useless. She had to find someone who was actually out there, in one of those supposedly empty star systems, someone who knew why 500,000 people would decide to build warships for fun. She had to go straight to the source. A new fire lit in her eyes. She turned back to her console, completely ignoring the official government networks and diving straight into the wild, chaotic, beautiful mess of the civilian internet. Enz dove headfirst into the digital ocean of forums and guilds that humanity called creativity, a place that always gave her a splitting headache. She was looking for shipbuilders. Thousands of communities popped up. She filtered the search for massive-scale projects, then cross-referenced the scanner data, focusing on the Carina Vale region. A bunch of smaller groups showed up, the Nebula Knitters, the Vela Sculptors, and then she hit the jackpot. The project scale and energy readings of one guild were a perfect match. The Cosmic Canvas, 8.4 billion members. Their specialization, aesthetic dreadnought construction. Enz stared at their homepage. The banner was a picture of a stunningly beautiful ship floating in a swirl of colorful gas clouds, its body shaped like some giant mythical beast. Their motto read, "Because the universe is our canvas, and we brought some really big brushes." The guild leader's profile picture showed a smiling guy in his mid-30s, whose grin screamed either total enlightenment or a complete break from reality. Kevin "Kev" Jenkins lived in the Lewison system, project lead on 19 completed dreadnoughts, and right now he was live streaming a tour of his personal flagship. Enz checked the clock on her console. 23 hours and 14 minutes left. She opened a priority communications link. "And if you look over here," a cheerful voice was saying from her speaker, "you can see we decided on an Art Deco style for the bottom fins. And I'm talking real Art Deco, not that fake retro junk they're putting in the Proxima colony. See how the geometric shapes catch the starlight? That's 300 kilometers of hand-designed paneling. Took our team 18 months just to get the finish right." Kevin Jenkins's face appeared on her screen, lit by the warm glow of what looked like an incredibly luxurious ship bridge. He was wearing a t-shirt that said, "My other ride is also a dreadnought," and was waving his arm at something just off camera. "The trick is the chromatic layering," he explained enthusiastically. "You use different metal alloys at different depths, and when the light hits it just right, you get this amazing cascade of shimmering color that, oh hey, a new person in the chat." His eyes snapped to his camera, and his smile got even bigger. "Welcome to the Gilded Kraken channel. First time? You picked a great day. I'm doing a full tour of the ship to show off all the new stuff from our last building phase. So grab a snack, sit back, and let me show you what 6 years of community art looks like. Mr. Jenkins." Enz kept her voice perfectly calm and level. "I need to speak with you. This is an urgent Priority 1 diplomatic channel." Kevin's big smile faltered and his face scrunched up in confusion. "A diplomatic channel? Wait, is this about a guild sponsorship or something? Because we've already got a deal with Nebula Craft for our material printers, and I'm not really looking to—" "Mr. Jenkins, my name is Enz Raleigh. I'm a diplomatic attaché for the Stellar Assembly, In about 23 hours, the combined military fleets of 43 alien civilizations are going to declare war on the human race. And the reason they're doing it is because of your ships. There was dead silence. Kevin just blinked. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His expression shifted from confused to baffled, and finally to pure, absolute horror. His brow wrinkled, and he looked genuinely hurt. "I'm sorry," he said, speaking slowly as if to a child. "Did you just say war?" "Yes, a war over our ships." "I see," she replied. "Your art ships." The Stellar Assembly's new scanners just picked up over 500,000 Dreadnought-class vessels in human territory. They believe you're staging a fleet for a galactic invasion. The words sounded completely insane, even as she said them, but she had to continue. The Thay Dominion, led by Admiral Herat, is moving their entire fleet to launch what he's calling a defensive preemptive strike. Kevin just buried his face in his hands. "But they aren't for fighting," he mumbled. "How could anyone possibly think that? We just printed them with public domain matter compilers. It's just a hobby." "They're historical models," he pleaded. "We got the old Confederation Navy blueprints online and built them from the ground up. The Gilded Kraken's main gun is a nebula projector. We use it to make light shows." "I'm aware. We spent 4 years building the sculpture garden in the cargo hold. It's made from asteroids we hand-carved from 9 different star systems." "I understand that. We have a book club that meets every week in the observation lounge." "Mr. Jenkins, Kevin, I believe you. And that's exactly why I'm calling you." Enns leaned closer to the screen, her voice tight with urgency. "I need you to help me explain this to the Stellar Assembly. They just don't think like humans do. The very concept that a species would build weapons of mass destruction just because they look cool is something they literally cannot process." "Yeah, well, when you say it like that, I need you to show them your work," she pressed on. "Show them what it is you really do. Help me convince them that 500,000 battleships are just a hobby." "A hobby?" Kevin's voice went dead flat. "You want me to explain to a council of alien warlords that we built enough firepower to crack a galaxy because we thought it was pretty?" "Yes." "And you actually think that'll stop a war?" "I think it's the only shot we've got," she said. Kevin just stared into the camera for a long, quiet moment, and then his smile changed. It wasn't his usual practiced grin for his audience. This was something real, something excited. "You know what? This is kind of incredible." He stood up, vanished off screen for a second, and came back with a jacket. "I mean, it's horrible, of course. War is terrible, but someone actually wants to see our art. Like, really see it. Real aliens. A completely new audience." A jolt of energy shot through him, and his eyes gained a sharp focus that Enns had only ever seen in her father, a landscape artist, whenever someone took a genuine interest in his crop circle sculptures. "Wait, did you say the Stellar Assembly? Like, the Stellar Assembly? The ancient council that's been running the galaxy since before humans even had fire?" "That's the one." Holy cow, this is the biggest gallery opening in the history of humanity. It's the largest audience we've ever had. I have to get a presentation ready. I need to make a highlight reel. I need to... "Kevin," Enns broke through his frantic excitement. "We're on a very tight schedule. Can you be ready in 4 hours?" 4 hours? To present to the governing body of the entire galaxy? He grinned wide. "Ma'am," he said, "I've been ready for this my entire life." "Maybe," she suggested, her voice a little tight, "you could wear something a bit more formal." Kevin looked down at his t-shirt. This is my formal shirt." Enns shut her eyes, counted to 10, and reminded herself that the survival of her species was in this man's hands. 4 hours, she said again. "I'm sending the connection details now." When she returned to the chamber of the Stellar Assembly, the air had changed. Admiral Herat was there again, standing like a statue at the observation window, watching as giant orbital defense cannons swiveled into new positions. The raw anger from before was still there, but it had settled into a cold, patient resolve. The other delegates had spent the last few hours talking to their homeworlds, getting their orders and digging in their heels. The vote, scheduled for 19 hours from now, already felt like a done deal, like a collision alarm that wouldn't stop screaming. "Attaché Relly," Admiral Herat's voice thundered across the room. "I hope you've used your time well." "I have, Admiral. I have new evidence to present. A witness who can explain what those ships are really for." "A witness," he repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. "Another human, I assume." "A builder," she corrected him. "One of the artists who created the ships you found. To hear his testimony, I'll need to open a live communications link to his vessel." Herat's armored brow furrowed. "Absolutely not. Opening an unsecured channel into this chamber during a Level 1 security alert is against every protocol." "Not quite, Admiral." Prefect Zill's calm voice drifted from his containment sphere. "Assembly Protocol 9.1.5, the right of evidentiary presentation, gives us the right to hear direct testimony from a primary source when facing an existential threat. That protocol overrides standard security measures." Herat shot a glare at Zill. "That's an ancient rule, from before we even had holographic tech. Using it now is beyond reckless." "It is our law," Zill said, plain and simple, "and our laws are most important when we are afraid, Admiral." Herat held Zill's gaze for a long moment, then turned his icy stare back to En's. "Fine," he growled, "but Volani military intelligence will be monitoring and firewalling the entire connection. Any funny business, any attempt to send data, and we cut the link instantly." "Understood." Enz nodded and walked over to the console, her fingers shaking just a little as she typed in the connection codes. All around the chamber, the delegates got comfortable in their atmospheric spheres, their eyes glued to the holographic display in the center of the room. The display flickered on, shimmered, and then expanded into a life-size projection of Kevin Jenkins. He was standing in a room that looked like a cathedral designed by a fan of both classical architecture and heavy metal album art. Kevin waved cheerfully. "Hey everyone, I'm Kevin Jenkins. I'm the guildmaster for a group called the Cosmic Canvas, and I'm just so unbelievably excited to be here." He was Ensaw with a mix of horror and relief, wearing the exact same t-shirt. "Before we start, I just want to say what a huge honor it is to show our work to such a famous audience. Honestly, most people don't even know our art exists, so thank you. Thank you so much for this amazing opportunity." The entire assembly just stared back at him in dead silence. From somewhere in the room, the hum of a Yithian delegate's atmospheric processor seemed incredibly loud. "Okay, so," Kevin clapped his hands together, "let's talk about the Gilded Kraken." He made a grand gesture, and the hologram behind him switched to show the outside of the ship. It was a massive vessel, easily 15 kilometers long, shaped like a crazy mix of an old wooden sailing ship and a giant sea monster. Its hull was covered in complex, beautiful patterns that caught the starlight and bent it into shimmering rainbows of color. "This was my first really big project," Kevin said with pride. "It took 6 years from the first sketch to the final product. Our main team was only about 300 people, but we had almost 10,000 others from the community chipping in. The whole idea came from old Earth myths. The Kraken was this big, legendary monster from our stories, but we wanted to put a space-themed twist on it, you know?" As he walked, his holographic image moved with him, floating down hallways that were a perfect blend of functional and just plain gorgeous. The walls had these smooth, organic curves, covered in paintings of stylized galaxies and nebulae. Light fixtures shaped like glowing deep-sea creatures cast dancing shadows everywhere. Our whole philosophy was pretty simple. If you're going to build something that big, you should make it a beautiful place to call home. We've got about 40 people who live here full-time, artists, engineers, and a chef who can do amazing things with protein paste, plus another 200 or so who drop in for different projects. Admiral Herat stepped forward. "Mr. Jenkins?" Kevin paused mid-sentence. "Yes?" You talk about residence, living spaces, and your community. The Admiral's voice was dangerously low. You have not yet talked about its weapons, its combat ratings, or its military purpose. Oh, right. I should probably get to that, Kevin said with a nod, looking genuinely happy to help. So technically, the Gilded Kraken does have some old military gear. When we built it using the historical blueprints, we kept the original Confederation Navy weapon hardpoints, to be authentic. But we repurposed most of them. The torpedo tubes up front, they're hydroponic gardens now. You have to try the tomatoes. They're out of this world. We also replaced the defensive turrets with mounts for hanging external sculptures. And the main cannon? Harad pressed, his voice a low growl. Kevin's entire face lit up. Oh man, that's the coolest part. The main spinal cannon was originally a heavy particle accelerator designed to bombard planets. A really nasty weapon. We spent 3 years converting it into a wide-angle nebula projector. So instead of shooting a beam of pure destruction, it sprays out these diffused particle streams that hit gas clouds and create the most incredible aurora effects you've ever seen. It all comes down to the local gas, he explained with a grin. Hydrogen makes everything glow red and pink. Helium gives you those cool greens and blues. And if you're lucky enough to find a pocket of ionized oxygen, he made a little poof gesture with his hands, you get this incredible deep purple. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you turned a weapon that could crack a planet in half into a giant laser light projector. Exactly, Kevin's face lit up. We put on shows every couple of months. Our last one, the Carina Vale event, pulled in almost 12 million viewers. We had 40 ships painting the whole nebula with synchronized patterns. Took ages to plan, but it was a massive hit. The chamber was dead silent. All around me, I could see the alien delegates just staring, their faces a mixture of confusion and pure disbelief. But then, something else started to bubble up under the surface. Pure anger. Are you telling us, the lead prosecutor Harad said, stretching out every single word, that you built a dreadnought, a warship capable of leveling cities, just to make pretty lights in the sky? Well, they're more than just pretty lights. There's a whole artistic movement behind it. You wasted resources that could have fed entire star systems. You took up shipyard space that could have built ships for defense, for exploration. You squandered brilliant engineering minds, all for, his voice trembled with fury, pretty lights. Kevin winced. Yeah, when you say it like that, it does sound a little irresponsible. Hark turned to the assembly. This is the enemy we face. A threat so deep it's almost impossible to grasp. A species so fundamentally immature, so catastrophically reckless, that they treat the tools of genocide like a paint-by-numbers kit. He pointed a clawed finger at Kevin's holographic image. You want us to believe this man isn't a danger? He represents a threat worse than any I've ever known. It is the threat of chaos, a civilization so wealthy, so bored, and so disconnected from consequences that they build planet killers for fun. Now, wait just a minute, Kevin tried to cut in. I stepped forward. If I may, you may not, Hark's voice cracked like a whip. I've heard enough of your excuses, enough of this human foolishness. He turned his burning gaze back to Kevin's hologram. Mr. Jenkins, you say your super cannon is just an artist's brush. Prove it. Kevin just blinked, confused. Show us. Find a target nearby, a stray asteroid, some space junk, anything big, and fire your art cannon at it. Let's all see these pretty lights you're so proud of. Hark's smile was razor thin and full of venom. Unless, of course, you're afraid your art supplies still have a few unintended consequences. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I knew it was a trap. If he refused, it would look like he was hiding something. But Kevin just saw an opportunity to show off his work. Sure, no problem at all, he said cheerfully, turning to a console just out of view. Let me just scan the area. Okay, got one. There's a rogue asteroid about 4,000 clicks off our starboard side. Nice, solid piece of rock. Just give me a second to line up the shot. The holographic image shifted, showing the massive ship, the Gilded Kraken, turning with a grace that defied its size. In the distance, We could see the asteroid, a tiny glimmer of ice and stone about 3 kilometers wide. "Alrighty," Kevin's voice piped up as he reappeared at his controls. "Starting the charge sequence. This usually takes about 2 minutes for a full-spectrum blast. I've got it set for a 12-color flood. That's kind of our signature move, but I can tone it down if you're short on time." "The full spectrum will be just fine," Harkot replied, his voice dripping with condescension. The entire chamber watched in tense silence as Kevin worked, his cheerful mood completely unaffected by the hostile atmosphere. He honestly seemed excited to have a new audience for his art. I watched Hark, who was watching Kevin, and tried to imagine all the ways this could go horribly wrong. Firing in 5, 4, 3. The Gilded Kraken's main cannon began to glow. For a brief moment, the beam was exactly what Kevin promised. A beautiful wave of diffused light spreading out from the ship, hitting trace gases in space and creating stunning, fleeting sparks of red, gold, purple, and green against the black. And then, that beautiful beam hit the asteroid. The impact was, for the moment, the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The streams of particles slammed into the rock and ice, instantly vaporizing the surface and igniting the frozen gases trapped within. Waves of brilliant color erupted across the asteroid, creating dancing, swirling patterns like an aurora borealis. For about 10 seconds, the giant rock looked like a celestial jewel, glowing with an otherworldly light. And then it shattered into a million pieces. A direct hit from a weapon would have turned it to dust. This was different. The particle impacts and the rapid heating worked together to break the asteroid apart into thousands of glowing fragments, each one spinning off into space, trailing a shimmering tail of ionized dust. Kevin just stared, horrified. "Oh, crud," he finally mumbled. "The particle slop. The beam itself has almost no force. It's just designed to make gas glow. But there's a gravimetric shear effect we haven't quite worked out yet. It doesn't do anything to a shielded ship, but on a raw, unprotected chunk of rock like that, yeah, that can happen." "Enough," Hark's voice cut through his rambling excuse. "You've shown us exactly what I was afraid of. Your art project is still perfectly capable of shattering a celestial body. Your little light show can obliterate a target weighing billions of tons." He spun back to face the assembly. "This is their idea of being harmless. They have barely disguised weapons that they treat like children's toys, capable of mass destruction even when they aren't trying." "It was an accident," Kevin yelled. "Precisely." Hark's composure finally snapped and he roared. "An accident, and your people have a million ships capable of similar accidents. What happens when one of your so-called artists accidentally aims their art cannon at an inhabited world? What happens when your next light show miscalculates and paints a colony with a beam that shatters continents?" The chamber erupted into total chaos. Delegates were shouting at each other, their long, simmering fear boiling over into open rage. Across the room, an alarm went off as a delegate's life support sphere malfunctioned from the occupants' skyrocketing stress levels. I watched as my entire diplomatic mission crumbled into dust. Kevin's demonstration had just convinced everyone that humanity wasn't just reckless, we were dangerously incompetent. A species that built things it didn't understand, a species that played with unimaginable power without a single thought for the consequences, a species that turned the tools of Armageddon into toys and dared to call their carelessness art. Hark's accusation hit me with the force of a physical blow. With a sharp flick of my wrist, I cut Kevin's hologram, silencing his desperate attempts to explain calibration errors. His image vanished, leaving only the sight of the slowly expanding debris field on the main screen. "Honored delegates," I said. My voice was quiet, but it sliced through the chaos like a knife. The chamber instantly fell silent as 218 pairs of eyes locked onto me. I took a slow, deep breath. My shoulders relaxed, and I let go of all the rigid formality I'd been holding on to. "You're right," I said. "Everything Admiral Harkot just said is, for the most part, correct. We built 500,000 dreadnoughts because we ran out of other things to do. We turned weapons of mass destruction into art supplies. We built a fleet that could tear this galaxy apart, and then we used it to make pretty lights in space." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "And that is precisely why you have no idea what you're dealing with." Harod opened his mouth to protest, but I just talked right over him. "I have spent my entire life trying to translate humanity for you. I tried to put it in your terms: strategy, logic, predictable self-interest. I took our beautiful, glorious chaos and tried to cram it into your rigid little boxes. I tied up our insanity with diplomatic ribbons to make us seem safe and understandable." I shook my head. "And that was my greatest mistake, because it made you think you actually understood us. It gave you the illusion that you could predict our next move, that our behavior, no matter how weird, would eventually make sense according to your rules." I walked past the podium, past Admiral Harkott, who stood there frozen, until I was standing in the absolute center of the room. "You want to know why we built those ships? The answer is so simple. We did it because we could. We did it because the universe is vast and strange and mostly empty. And when you have nearly unlimited resources and time, you either create or you go insane. And if you attack us, if you follow through on this preemptive war, you will not be fighting a military you can analyze. You will be fighting an entire species of bored, brilliant, and infinitely creative people who have just been handed the single most exciting project of their lives." The chamber was so quiet, I could hear my own heart beating. "You counted 500,000 dreadnoughts, ships that were built for beauty, for self-expression, for the simple joy of making something amazing exist. Now, I want you to imagine those same people, with those same resources and that same creativity, all laser-focused on one single goal: war." I let that thought settle in the silence. Imagine what they would build then. Imagine what they would do. "Is that a threat, Attaché Raleigh?" Harkott's voice was as cold and empty as deep space. "No," I said. "It's a warning, not from me. It's a warning from reality itself." She stared him down, her eyes unflinching. "You've dedicated your life to fighting wars you could wrap your head around, against enemies who played by the same rulebook, fighting for things you understood. But your strategies, your perfect little theories, they just don't work on us. Your war manuals have zero advice for an enemy that might just blow up your planet because they think the crater would look cool, or an enemy that might save your entire race just because they happen to like the color of your star." She threw her hands up. "We don't fit into your neat little boxes of friend or foe. We're a chaotic force. We're human. And you will never, ever be able to guess what we'll do next. Honestly, most of the time, neither can we." A wave of unease rippled through the assembly. High-ranking delegates fidgeted inside their protective spheres, swapping nervous glances across the hall. For the first time, even Admiral Harkott's ironclad confidence seemed to waver. He was mentally racing, trying to process what she'd just told him, searching for some military angle he could use. Just then, the main view screen lit up. New signals were pouring in. First a few dozen, then hundreds. The comm system was groaning under the strain as it tried to process one connection after another, each one flagged with a standard human civilian ID code. "What in the—" an aide began to ask. That's when Kevin's face appeared in a small window on the screen. He looked like he was half mortified and half ecstatic. Hey, so I might have mentioned to a couple of buddies that I was doing this big presentation for the Stellar Assembly, and they might have told a few more people, and, well," he gestured vaguely at the waterfall of incoming video feeds. "It turns out a lot of people wanted to show off their ships, too." The main holographic screen fractured into a grid, which then split into smaller grids and then split again. All around the chamber, 3D projections of ships winked into existence, each one more mind-boggling than the last. There was a warship built to look exactly like a massive electric guitar, its finish shifting through every color in the visible spectrum, and probably some that only aliens could see. Another ship was a flying Gothic cathedral, complete with enormous ornate buttresses that had no engineering purpose whatsoever, but looked incredibly cool against the fiery backdrop of a dying star. And then there was a ship that was, for reasons Inez couldn't even begin to imagine, A rubber duck several kilometers long. "Oh, that one's the Cosmic Quack," Kevin added, his voice full of pride. The Proxima Novelty Guild made it to protest boring, standardized ship designs. It's really just a gigantic sculpture with no engines. They have to tow it from one convention to another. More ships blinked into view. One was shaped like a giant Christmas tree, its hull covered in twinkling lights that spelled out holiday greetings in 72 different languages. Another was a dreadnought that had been hollowed out and converted into a massive space brewery, its cargo bays now used to ferment craft beer using gas from colorful nebulae. There was even a ship that was a perfect upscaled replica of an ancient Earth building called the Taj Mahal, but this one was about 30 kilometers high. "The space beer one is a huge hit," Kevin continued, really warming up to his topic. "They've won Guild of the Year 3 times in a row. Apparently, the flavor you get from a hydrogen-rich nebula is just unbelievable. It gives the beer this really complex mineral taste." Admiral Harcourt just stood there, frozen in the center of the room, completely surrounded by holographic nonsense. He was visibly struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. A capital ship whose primary function was brewing beer, a warship modeled after a bath toy, a weapons platform that was now a flying church. Just seconds ago, his hand had been hovering over the command seal that would have launched a fleet to wipe them all out. Now, that same hand was stuck in midair, caught between decisive action and complete system-shocked paralysis. "Admiral," Inez said, her voice soft and calm, "can you find a military strategy here? A tactical logic? Is there any kind of plan you can counter?" His jaw clenched. With a slow, deliberate movement, his hand fell back to his side. "I didn't think so." And that was the moment Prefect Zill moved with a speed no one had seen from him in decades. Deep-seated instincts, dormant for years, suddenly came roaring back. The old politician knew an opportunity when he saw one. And this magnificent, glorious tidal wave of human weirdness was the opportunity of a lifetime. "My esteemed colleagues," he announced, his voice slicing through the stunned silence with well-practiced authority, "I believe the information we're witnessing points to a new path forward, one that could be beneficial for everyone." The delegates, who were still gawking at holographic ships that defied all common sense, slowly shifted their focus to the ancient Chalaran. The evidence presented today clearly indicates that human shipbuilding, while certainly capable of being weaponized, is primarily driven by— He paused, carefully selecting the most diplomatic term. "Creative expression. An expression that, if left unchecked, could certainly present unpredictable challenges to galactic peace and order." Admiral Harcourt was starting to recover from his shock, and his eyes narrowed with suspicion as he stared at Zill. "What exactly are you suggesting, Prefect?" "I am suggesting a formal recognition and classification of human artistic works, a galactic grand exhibition to be sponsored by this very assembly, which would provide a structured environment for the display and celebration of human creativity." Zill's voice became as smooth as polished stone, the sound of a master politician closing the deal of his career. An initiative like this would accomplish several things. It would legitimize human creative expression, thereby reducing the chances of misunderstandings. It would also establish official lines of communication between human artist guilds and our own oversight committees. And, he paused just long enough for the tension to build, it would give the humans something to compete for, besides new territory. "You want to subdue them with an art competition?" Harcourt asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "I want to redirect their incredible chaotic energy into predictable channels. I want to give them a stage to show off their creations that doesn't involve accidentally vaporizing asteroid fields or putting on light shows that can be seen from 3 spiral arms away." Zill met Harcourt's glare without flinching. "I want to take what you see as an existential threat and turn it into a manageable cultural event. That, Admiral, is the entire purpose of diplomacy." A quiet buzz filled the chamber as delegates began whispering to one another, their translation fields working overtime. Across the room, a Yulian representative's fronds, which had been rigid with fear just moments before, began to sway in a calm, thoughtful motion. "And who would oversee such a project?" someone called out. Zil slowly turned his head to look directly at Inez Raleigh. Attaché Raleigh has demonstrated a unique and remarkable insight into these human creative impulses. I propose we create a new Committee for Inexplicable Human Endeavors, and that the attaché be appointed as its chair. This committee would be tasked with cataloging human artistic projects, liaising with their creator communities, and providing early warnings of any, he chose his next words with extreme care, large-scale creations that might be misinterpreted by others. Every single delegate in the room swiveled to stare at her. 28 representatives from across the galaxy were now watching to see how she would respond after Zil had just nominated her for what might be the most impossible job in the history of the galaxy. Prefect Zil. She somehow managed to keep her voice even, hiding the fact that her heart was pounding against her ribs. So if I understand you correctly, this job would essentially make me the galaxy's first ever art critic for projects built on the scale of a dreadnought. Correct. And I would be expected to give a heads up about things like Kevin's nebula light shows? That would be a primary function, yes. And my core responsibility would be explaining human creativity to a group of species that have spent the last 300 years completely failing to get it. Zil gave a slight bow, his ancient hands spread wide. That is what you are already doing. Inez let her eyes wander across the holographic ships that still filled the room. The guitar ship, the cathedral ship, the whole beautiful, ridiculous, and utterly baffling parade of human imagination, all built into starships 15 kilometers long. She thought about her dad, who built spaceships that looked like lumpy potatoes. She thought about Kevin Jenkins and his pure, simple joy in using a weapon of mass destruction as a projector for a laser light show. She thought about the very real possibility of spending the rest of her career trying to explain all of it. I'm going to need a much bigger headset, she finally said. The proposal was put to a vote. It passed by a margin that shocked everyone in the room, except for Prefect Zil. The motion to launch a preemptive strike against humanity was officially shelved forever. In its place, the Assembly founded the Galactic Grand Exhibition and its Committee for Inexplicable Human Endeavors. Admiral Harcourt stood in stony silence through the entire proceeding. When the final count was in, he walked stiffly over to Inez. "Attaché Raleigh," he smirked. "This," he said, gesturing to the hologram of the fleet, "is about humanity's secret plan for galactic domination." Inez looked at the image, then back at the Admiral, and a strange expression crossed her face. It wasn't fear. It looked like she was trying not to laugh. "Admiral," she began, her voice calm, "those aren't dreadnoughts." Harcourt's smirk vanished. "Excuse me?" "They're canvases," she said simply. A confused murmur rippled through the chamber. "They're part of a multi-generational art project. We call it the Cosmic Gallery. They're designed to look like warships from a distance, a statement on the perception of power. Up close, their weapon ports are actually wide-spectrum light projectors and sonic emitters. They don't fire lasers, they create symphonies of light and sound." The silence in the room was now one of pure, dumbfounded shock. Harcourt stared, completely speechless. "You built 500,000 art installations?" he finally sputtered. "Yes," Inez said. "We thought it would be a beautiful surprise for future civilizations to stumble upon. A message that we value creation over destruction." She turned to face the entire assembly. "The greatest threat my people pose to you is that you might be deeply moved by a piece of performance art." The tension in the chamber didn't just break. It completely evaporated, replaced by the most profound and awkward silence the galaxy had ever known. Admiral Harcourt, the great warrior, had just tried to declare war on an art gallery. The moral of the story? Never assume the worst in people, because you might just end up looking like the biggest fool in the universe.